Dimension 119, shout out to him, by the way, who plays Gramps. And he has never once said that he owned a gas station, but the running joke is that Dump and I kept on insinuating that he had in fact run a gas station. So then just by brute force alone, that became the lore.
Now, what actually spurred on the topic of today's conversation is not necessarily that post, but what they responded to that post about after they've had quite a few comments. And that was that they were happy that the comments kind of affirmed that their hand-designed map over procedural generation was actually a win in their book. And it really sparked a conversation inside the comments. And you know what? Me and Jarl both thought that other would be an amazing conversation to have with you folks. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. How well placed and how much effort has gone into building these sort of towns and the entire handcrafted map of Project Zomboid, which is an interesting thing because the devs have already stated that they're very pleased about the fact that they chose to go that route.
Yes, and I think it really solidifies what they're trying to create. You know, I actually commented to this tweet and I said, well, because a lot of people are like procedural, but I don't think they realize what they'll lose if they do a procedural map. It makes total sense to me that as a local, you'd say, hey, I know where to get a wood oven. You know, I know where to get this supply. I know where to get a generator. We should go to the lumberyard because I know we can find these items. Because when you think about games like Resident Evil, all those zombie horror games that kind of have paved the way, that weren't stuck in the middle of nowhere, it was very good to see like Leon being able to communicate with the other survivors and say, I'm going here because I know this is there. And it makes it realistic. Another good example is when you watch Walking Dead, right? Rick Grimes is clearly not from Atlanta. When he runs into the middle and hides in the tank, Glenn radios to him, and Glenn has a very good sound idea on where things are in Atlanta because they're from there. And that really does make a lot of sense.
Fair enough, fair enough. However, there are real-life examples of people building in almost kind of weird places. But overall, I think that we live in a modern world with modern times. And even if cities are only like 100 years old, they were still planned out to be not necessarily the most optimal, but they were planned. They just weren't naturally created like we would see with ancient civilizations with some of the people down in Mexico or the top part of South America where they're building the cliff sides and other places. They all have their purposes for doing that, but you don't see that in like, 300 to 400 years back. You see a lot of planning going on. So that's kind of the thing I really enjoy about some of their hand-designed aspects, is that, again, it feels like it actually would have been a town. Yeah, there's a couple things that stand out, but I think that would be more of a, they didn't upgrade or they didn't bulldoze it to modernize it or whatever, because they didn't feel a need to at that time. You could find some like old remnants of like the town, being left behind, and then you can see the newer parts of the towns. But yeah, I mean, that's the amazing part of all this, is that when people take the time, effort, and energy to make these maps, they can be just as good as procedural generation maps. Yes, you don't get that flair where every time you boot up the map, you have a new type of map to explore, but there are many types of ways to explore procedural generation in different ways than you might think, folks. So we got down and dirty and talked about the beauty and the majesty of the time and effort it takes to make hand-designed maps. But procedural generation actually doesn't mean that the devs are lazy or not willing to do the work. In fact, it almost means that they might actually put in more work than most people think they do. Now, Jarl, what do you think about procedural generation overall?
I actually think it's a very strong tool. Procedural generation, that was one of the things I played with when I was going to school. It is a very handy tool, but it takes a lot of rules. If you get the rules right, I think you could make an a world that never ends. If you were to walk in a straight line, it would feel like a total immersive world. You would be encapsulated in different environments, and it could fit a theme and it could fit a story. If you say this is a city area, it could randomly generate the city area. You could even go as far as saying, if there's a hospital here, put these these buildings are allowed next to it. You can establish a lot of hard-coded rules to make the procedural generation more closely to a static design map.
You have had a lot of experience with procedural generation, or at least used it as a tool when you were up and learning about it. My experiences with it, I would say firsthand, are a little bit non-existent, but what I've been told and slash what I've been read about is that you're right. It's a lot of rules and guidelines they have to follow. However, it can get pretty complicated what they have to actually really decide to do in these situations. But that does bring us up to the next subject. I think they are already considering this with basements. Now, the basements are going to be a range of basements that they're going to choose from. And I believe they have stated inside this article I just linked, where the basements are going to correlate to the size of the house above it, or maybe a little bit bigger or smaller, but they're still going to be, comparable. And the layout of them is actually going to be a little bit different, I believe.
Yeah, I think that as long as it follows the bounds of this is the basement for this house, and it's not, I mean, I could understand having maybe an extension for a cellar entrance on the side, but as long as it's not like you go into the basement of a house and you find it's a warehouse, as long as they limit it with the rules, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Give us that experience of, ooh, it's different. But you know what game does it really well that I'm kind of hoping comes from the basements? Fallout. And you all know what I'm talking about. When you're playing Fallout 3, for example, you go to that super duper mart southeast of Megaton. Either you show up there and there's bandits, super mutants, death claws, an alien ship crashing. The idea is to create the illusion that you never know what to expect while still stuck in the confines of the static map. And I think procedurally generated basements really give us that option. There's some boundaries, but you never know what you're going to find downstairs.
Thank you for coming by, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to check out Jarl of Goats on Twitch when he is live, and Red Falcon and his amazing work in the DayZ community. Without these two, the show would not be the same. I hope you all have a wonderful day.